Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Hyung Yoon, Associate Editor of Human Resource Development Review. And today we have Dr. Valerie Anderson, who is the Best Reviewer Award winner of 2022 HRDR. That's one of premier journals in the field of human resource development. And congratulations, Dr. Anderson. And
thank you.
Today, well, we have some questions that could help our readers to understand the review process, and maybe also some suggestions or tips that you might have for future reviewers or our colleagues in general. So before we get started, maybe can you introduce yourself briefly, and then I will ask some questions.
Okay, thank you so much. And let me say what a pleasure it is to speak with you today, and how honored and privileged I felt to receive this award from Human Resource Development Review, because reviewing is something that we all have to do. And it's great when the efforts that we make can be appreciated. So I'm very grateful to the journal for that award. And I feel that it is it's very helpful that we all do recognize the contributions that we all make to the peer review process. To introduce myself, as you will have gathered from my voice, I come from the United Kingdom, from England, and I work at the University of Portsmouth in the south of England, and I am Professor of Human Resource Development and Education. And I see very much my role in working with doctoral candidates and new career researchers as part of that HRD practice of my own as well.
Okay, great. Thank you for the introduction. Let's get started. In your opinion, what is the primary role of a reviewer for a journal, scholarly journal?
Okay, thank you. Do you know, I remember the first paper I ever submitted, and then these reviews came back, and that was quite a scary, nerve-wracking place for me to be. As time has gone on, so at that time, I thought that the reviewer was a bit like a tutor or a critic, somebody who was looking to identify what was wrong with my work. As I've developed in my career, and as I've engaged more in peer review processes myself, I've come to realize the value of peer review is in being a fresh pair of eyes, a new sense of looking at a piece of work to offer what I like to call a critical friends evaluation of that piece of work. So my own view now is that the peer review process is so important because it is an additional voice in the construction of the work of scholarship, of the work of the author. So that's the first thing that, for me, being a peer reviewer involves. It does also involve a process of evaluation. So part of my job when I'm carrying out peer review is to have some sense, some judgment about the merit, the worth, the significance, or the potential of the paper that has been submitted. But this is only a partial and a provisional assessment, because the peer reviewer is providing a voice to the editor. And it's the job of the editor to make the ultimate assessment and judgment about how best to take that paper forward. So I do see myself as an additional voice, and I hope a constructively critical voice in that dialogue. If I may, I will also say what I think a review is not about being a reviewer. It's not about finding fault. It's not about closing down discussion. And I don't think it's the job of the reviewer to diminish a work of scholarship, a paper, or to diminish a scholar. Nor is it the job of the reviewer to start to impose constraints. The job is to open up the dialogue and enable the scholar to achieve their full potential.
I think that's so valuable, and I think you addressed important mindset that reviewers probably must have. So some reviewers don't have that mindset. Some reviewers, maybe people who are starting their career as a researcher, or some people. But I think your review was very high in quality and highly constructive, and also we sense that you had those constructive or developmental mindset as a reviewer. So and I feel that probably different reviewers have different rituals to follow. So
yeah.
Would you tell us a little bit about the step-by-step process you follow when you review a paper?
I do my best. And I think it's important, though, to remember there is no one right way to do it. And people have to find their own practice, find their own way by experience, as I have done over many years. So the first step in the process is having accepted the invitation to review, I've then got to find the right time and place. I don't think you can do a good review if you're distracted by other things. Right. So for me, it's very often at the weekend, if I can find a quiet time at the weekend. I very often will take a review or two with me on holiday. And anywhere where there is headspace. A train journey is a good place for me to read someone's paper, but never on a plane. It's too crowded. So find the place, find the time. Then the process I will do is I will read the paper carefully. And while I'm reading it, I will be making notes to myself as I go along, just all sorts of different notes about different things that occur to me while I'm reading the paper. But in particular, I want to try to identify what is or what could be special about this paper. I do want to be as thorough as possible in a respectful way. So I don't want to overlook the details. And I want to identify in the notes I make where I think more details are necessary, where clarification is needed.
And that, can I interrupt you? Do you
please do.
Always print out the article, so you don't work on it on the screen?
Actually, I do work it on the screen now.
Really? Okay.
I do it on the screen now. I think this has occurred especially since COVID. We didn't always have access to printers, and I've discovered how much I can do. So I have the document on my screen, and I now have a Word document where I'm typing my notes.
Okay.
So it's a good question. I try to always, for HRDR, you have particular criteria that you want the reviewers to address. Right. I undertake a lot of reviews for other journals as well. So part of my process is to remind myself what criteria the journal are looking for and what their language is. I try to use the language of the journal in my notes as well. And the main thing is to try to be open-minded and actually open-hearted in this process, to avoid the temptation to be judgmental, and to be as constructive as possible. So I will especially look to see, first of all, what is the main question and the focus, and how clearly expressed is that? What is the contribution, and how does it add to the field? Then I also look, is there a golden thread through that paper? Starting at the back end, do the conclusions come logically from the evidence and the arguments and the main question that was posed? And in that way, particularly with human resource development review papers, because some of them may be an integrative literature review, a systematic literature review, a methodological paper, is the paper fit for purpose? Has it been written and designed in the right way? And then when I've got all my notes at the end, I tend to group them together. And I also ask myself if there are any additional resources or references that I think might help the author as they go forward. They're suggestions, they're not instructions. Then the last thing I do is, if there's time, I try to leave that review for a few hours and then come back to it later to reread it. And I often find I have to redraft it a little bit before I am ready to finally upload it onto the system. So I think that's generally the process that I go through.
Okay, great. Thank you. And you said you now use a Word doc and you look at the paper on the screen. Do you sometimes make a note directly on the PDF file where you found some issues where you develop some thoughts, or you always use Word doc to?
I do mostly use a Word document, but I will use I will use the highlighter tool on the PDF to highlight particular things. I, as an author, have received some reviews where all the reviewer seems to worry about is, did I get the referencing correct? And they look for typographical errors. I don't think, from my perspective, that is helpful to the author. I would rather expend my time on what I would call the bigger, more general issues that they might be able to tackle.
Okay, great. Thank you. My next question is about your philosophy as a reviewer, considering that HRDR particularly takes a highly developmental approach. And I think you've alluded to your potential answers in previous answers. So maybe you can summarize your philosophy as a reviewer.
I'll try to be brief, but I will say, I think the human resource development field has led the way in being developmental through the review process. Other journals are following now, other fields, and I think that's an excellent thing that the HRD field as a whole has contributed. So my philosophy, I suppose fundamentally, I am grateful to have the opportunity to review. I'm grateful to be invited, because being a reviewer is identity work. It's part of our academic identity. So it makes us part of a community of scholarly practice. I am a reader myself, and I'm curious what people are writing. And I am a writer and I'm a learner, and I learn. I think the opportunity for peer review, we can learn as much as we can give feedback. So I think my philosophy as a reviewer is that the aim is to encourage further writing and not put the author off, so that as a whole community of practice, our work is taken forward. And my last point is, my philosophy, I think, would include treating the author's work the way I would like my own work to be treated.
Beautiful. So I'm hoping that many of the reviewers and upcoming or soon-to-be reviewers would learn from you. So speaking of future reviewers, what tips do you have for those inexperienced reviewers or soon-to-be reviewers?
Yeah, I can remember the first time I was invited to do a review, and I was terrified. I didn't feel worthy. I had a big dose of imposter syndrome. So maybe I was too tentative, or maybe I was too strict in the other way, too regimented, maybe both. So I think my first piece of advice is, although it is important that we recognize our own limitations, it is also important that we don't let those limitations stop us from making a contribution. So a first tip is to identify for the editor as well as the author which parts of the paper you might be focusing on most, because that's where you know most, that's where you have most expertise. I think another tip is to always be respectful and polite, but also to be honest with the feedback process. And if things are not clear, then to give examples of where you would have appreciated as a reader more information. So I think it's important to be an interested reader, even if the paper that you're reading gets difficult or muddled. It is important to keep the level of interest. And I always appreciate it when reviewers of my work use the I expression. I found this very interesting. I would have appreciated more information about this, rather than writing in a very passive or third voice. And I think the last thing I would say is to try to use accessible English. Don't try to be too clever. Don't try to overcomplicate what you write as a means of protection. That will just make it harder for you and for the people. One last thing. Don't say one thing to the authors in the feedback and then recommend or say a different thing in the confidential comments to the editor. I think that's not really acceptable. There are some things you might want to say to the editor, that's fine, but you shouldn't then be saying something totally different to the authors.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Those are really great tips. I'm hoping that many people will watch this. All right. As we wrap up our interview, do you have anything else you want to share with the HRDR or HRD community in general?
Well, it's great to have this opportunity, but I think the questions you've asked have been really, really useful. Maybe one last thing is to share how, when we engage with peer review processes, we are engaged in a process that requires trust, and we have to build trust and be trusting in the relationships that we have. And perhaps also it can be difficult for people to know when they will have the time to carry out the review work. And I know myself, when I receive invitations, sometimes my heart sinks. Right. Because I think, although I would like to say yes, I don't know when I will do it. Right. So I think as a community, if we can try to ring fence some time for all of us to give reviews, that will really help everybody that's engaged in trying to publish their work and share their knowledge with each other.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. I have been thinking that rushed review is highly damaging to the community, to the authors, and so on. So
I agree with you. Yeah.
All right. Thank you again, Dr. Anderson, and thank you for the great tips, ideas, and your philosophies. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to reflect on my practice, and also to carry out these reviews and this recording as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.